A 14-year-old girl, pregnant with her father's child, desperately reaches out for help. But will anyone believe her? This chilling reality isn't just a nightmare, it's the painful truth of a life that has been hidden in plain sight. In a world where we think we know the people around us, sometimes the darkest secrets are the ones that go unnoticed the longest. This story will make you question everything about trust, control, and how well we truly know those closest to us. Before we dive into this disturbing case, we want to warn you, the details you're about to hear are both heartbreaking and disturbing. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you're new here, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. We deeply appreciate each and every one of our subscribers. Your support helps us raise awareness of these cases and keep the conversation going. A huge thank you to all of you who have shared, liked, and commented. Your engagement helps spread these crucial stories to a wider audience. Now let's begin. Imagine if you could have helped raise awareness earlier. Your subscription could help save more teenagers in the future. The quiet, unsuspecting neighborhood of Gothenburg, Sweden, hides a sinister secret, one that has been simmering for years. The city, with its cobbled streets and picturesque parks, is home to a family whose darkest secrets have remained buried beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered. Dr. Erik Dahlström, a well-respected family physician in the city, had seen his fair share of difficult cases. But none had prepared him for the unsettling encounter he would have one late afternoon. It was a routine day at his clinic, nestled in a quiet corner of Gothenburg, when a father and his daughter came in for what seemed like a simple checkup. Marco Håkan, a man Dr. Dahlström knew well from the neighborhood, arrived with his 14-year-old daughter, Lucia. They had lived just a few houses down from Dr. Dahlström's own home for the past year. Despite being neighbors, he had never exchanged more than a polite wave with them until today. Lucia sat nervously, her head bowed, eyes fixed on the floor, not once meeting the doctor's gaze. She seemed fragile, like she wanted to disappear into the floorboards beneath her. But it wasn't just her body language that raised the doctor's suspicion. It was her father, Marco. His overbearing presence loomed like a shadow, answering questions for Lucia before she could even speak. "Lucia," Dr. Dahlström said gently, trying to break the tension, "how have you been feeling lately?" Lucia's hands remained folded tightly in her lap, her response no more than a barely audible murmur. Marco, sensing the doctor's growing concern, quickly interjected, "She's been fine. Just a little tired. You know how teenagers are." There was something unsettling about Marco's tone. The way he spoke, like he was trying to control the narrative, keep his daughter's voice silent. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just protective parenting. It felt like a carefully constructed wall of control, one Dr. Dahlström couldn't ignore. Everything seemed normal, at least on the surface. Yet, there was an undercurrent of tension that Dr. Dahlström couldn't shake. When Nurse Rosa took Lucia's vitals, she had to remind Marco several times that she needed answers directly from Lucia, not him. His response was always the same: "She's not good at talking about things. Let me handle this." Rosa exchanged a look with Dr. Dahlström as she re-entered the exam room, her face pale. "Doctor, something's not right. There's more going on here than just a checkup," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Dahlström paused, the weight of her words settling into his chest. He knew the family. He had seen them around the neighborhood. But this was something different. Dr. Dahlström's hands hovered over Lucia's chart as he reviewed the symptoms. At just 14, Lucia showed signs of pregnancy. But it wasn't just the pregnancy that alarmed him, it was the pattern. The fact that Lucia, in her frail state, had been hiding this for months, possibly even longer. The faint traces of morning sickness, fatigue, and abdominal pain she reported, combined with her reluctance to engage, painted a troubling picture. But the real shock came when Dr. Dahlstrom prepared for the ultrasound. As the cold gel touched Lucia's abdomen, she winced, and for the first time, Dr. Dahlstrom saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. Fear. As the ultrasound machine buzzed to life, Dr. Dahlstrom stared at the screen. His heart skipped a beat. The image before him didn't match the numbers on the chart. 28 weeks. The growth was too slow. There were signs of intrauterine growth restriction (IUGR), an abnormality where the fetus isn't developing as it should. The heartbeat was irregular, weak. This wasn't just a medical emergency, it was a cry for help. As the examination continued, Dr. Dahlstrom's mind raced. He urged Marco to take Lucia to the hospital for further evaluation. Marco's resistance only deepened his suspicions. The father's calm exterior was cracking, and beneath it, Dr. Dahlstrom could sense the layers of lies. Lucia's statement after the ultrasound added to the growing mystery. She kicks when she hears his voice. A shiver ran down Dr. Dahlstrom's spine. That statement was no longer just a remark about pregnancy, it was an unsettling admission of something darker, more sinister. Was Lucia's baby reacting to the voice of the father, the same man who controlled her life? The clinic's waiting room, usually a calm and quiet space, seemed unnervingly tense as Dr. Eric Dahlstrom glanced up from his paperwork. Sitting in the corner was Lucia Håkan, a 14-year-old girl with her head tilted downward, her eyes locked firmly on the floor. Her fingers twisted the hem of her red hoodie, the fabric stretching and pulling as if it were the only thing holding her together. She couldn't sit still, her legs jiggling nervously under the chair. Dr. Dahlstrom watched her for a moment, trying to gauge whether her anxious movements were merely the typical nerves of a teenager. But there was something different about Lucia. Something unsettling. Was she just nervous about the appointment, or was there something deeper at play? The way she avoided making eye contact, the way she didn't speak unless forced to, it was as if she were hiding from something she was afraid to confront. Dr. Dahlstrom's instinct told him to dig deeper. As Lucia's father, Marco Håkan, spoke on her behalf, answering questions about her health and symptoms without giving her a chance to speak, a strange feeling began to stir in the doctor's gut. Why didn't Lucia respond? Why was her father so insistent on speaking for her? There was something in the way Marco held himself too, a subtle tension in his posture, the way his hand rested protectively on Lucia's shoulder, as if keeping her tethered to him. Was this simply the behavior of an overprotective father, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? When Nurse Rosa took Lucia's vitals, she could feel the unease in the room too. She glanced over at the doctor with a slight shake of her head, her brow furrowed in silent concern. It was as if the walls were closing in around them, and the air in the room became too thick to breathe. The feeling was subtle but unmistakable. Something wasn't right. As Rosa walked back into the exam room to clean the equipment, she leaned in close to Dr. Dahlstrom, lowering her voice. "There's something strange about that father and daughter," she whispered. "The girl barely speaks, and when I took her vitals, he answered everything for her. It's like he's controlling the entire conversation." Dr. Dahlstrom's eyes flicked to the waiting room where Marco and Lucia sat. The girl's body was stiff, her eyes fixed downward, avoiding everyone in the room. But why? Dr. Dahlstrom's mind raced as he reviewed the chart in front of him. At first glance, it seemed like a normal appointment, a young girl coming in for a routine checkup. But then something caught his eye. The symptoms: morning sickness, fatigue, abdominal pain, pregnancy symptoms. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the chart as if the words were somehow distorted on the page. A 14-year-old girl, pregnant? The shock of it was one thing, But the deeper concern was the fact that Lucia had never been to a specialist. No prenatal care, no hospital visits. Marco had kept everything quiet, controlled. And yet, here they were, in Dr. Dahlström's office, at the very edge of something that could unravel their lives forever. The doctor glanced over at Lucia in the waiting room. She was still fidgeting, her body rigid, her face a mask of exhaustion. She barely looked up when he called her name, and when she slowly stood, her movements were stiff, almost mechanical. The tension in her posture spoke volumes. She was holding something back, but what? Could she really be hiding a pregnancy this far along in plain sight? Why had no one noticed? Or perhaps, why had no one dared to look? As he prepared the ultrasound, the knot in Dr. Dahlström's stomach tightened. Something was off. The pieces of the puzzle weren't fitting together the way they should, and the more he watched Marco, the more his instinct screamed at him. What was Marco hiding? And why did Lucia look like she had given up on asking for help? Everything about this visit, this family, felt like a game of masks. Marco's controlled demeanor, Lucia's silence, it all pointed to something much darker, something that wouldn't stay hidden for long. Dr. Erik Dahlström prepared for the ultrasound, his mind racing with the growing unease he had felt since the moment Lucia and Marco walked into the clinic. The atmosphere in the room felt heavy, as if it were charged with something unspoken, something waiting to be revealed. As Lucia lay back on the examination table, her body stiff with anxiety, Dr. Dahlström tried to remain calm, but his heart began to beat faster. The questions swirling in his mind now had more weight than ever. When he applied the cold gel to Lucia's abdomen, she flinched, her breath catching in her throat. It wasn't just the discomfort of the procedure, there was fear there, fear that couldn't be ignored. Dr. Dahlström tried to reassure her, but she remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The ultrasound machine hummed to life, and as Dr. Dahlström moved the transducer over her belly, he watched the screen intently. At first, everything seemed normal, a typical scan of a pregnant woman's abdomen. But then something caught his eye. Something was off. The doctor stared at the screen in disbelief. This couldn't be right. A 14-year-old girl, 28 weeks pregnant, with symptoms of intrauterine growth restriction. The fetus wasn't growing at a typical rate. The heart rate was erratic, too slow, too weak. Dr. Dahlström's hand froze over the controls, his mind scrambling to process the information. What the hell was happening? He adjusted the machine, trying to make sense of the images before him. The growth patterns were wrong, the fetal heart rate irregular. Everything about this pregnancy was not just abnormal, it was alarming. Something was wrong. And yet, Marco's calm voice from across the room barely registered in his thoughts. "Is she okay?" Marco asked, his tone oddly detached, almost too casual for what was unfolding. Dr. Dahlström glanced over at him, still processing the images on the screen. 28 weeks pregnant, and the baby was already showing signs of distress. Something wasn't right. Not just with the pregnancy but with the situation as a whole. The more he looked at Lucia, the more questions piled up. Why was she hiding this from her father? Marco was too involved. It wasn't just that he was answering the doctor's questions on Lucia's behalf. It wasn't just that he had taken control of the entire conversation. It was the way he was hovering over Lucia, his eyes never leaving her, his hand still gripping her shoulder as if he were afraid someone would snatch her away. Dr. Dahlström couldn't shake the feeling that Marco was controlling every single aspect of this moment. Her answers, her actions, even the way she held herself. She hadn't spoken a word on her own since the appointment began. Not once had she looked the doctor in the eye. As Dr. Dahlström tried to redirect his questions to Lucia, Marco quickly stepped in. "She's been having morning sickness and fatigue," he said, cutting the doctor off. "But she's just a bit tired, nothing serious." The more Marco talked, the more Dr. Dahlström's discomfort grew. He had seen fathers like Marco before, the ones who thought they knew best, the ones who tried to answer questions for their children as if they weren't capable of speaking for themselves. But this was different. There was something about Marco's insistence that made Dr. Dahlström uneasy. It was as though he were hiding something about Lucia, something about the pregnancy. When the doctor asked Lucia directly, "Lucia, would you prefer to answer these questions yourself?" She gave the faintest of nods, her voice barely a whisper as she muttered, "I've been sick, a lot." But Marco didn't let her finish. He interrupted again, his tone growing sharper. "She's been complaining about pain. But it's nothing to worry about." It wasn't just the words, it was the control in Marco's voice. The way he shut Lucia down with every attempt she made to speak for herself. Why wasn't Lucia allowed to speak? Why was Marco acting like this was all so normal? Dr. Dahlström's mind was spinning as he reviewed the ultrasound results once more. The irregular heartbeat, the growth restriction, the complete lack of concern from Marco. It didn't make sense. If Marco cared about his daughter's well-being, why wasn't he reacting to the severity of the situation? Why wasn't he worried about the fetus? Dr. Dahlström's gut told him that there was more to this story than he was being told. He needed to know the truth. But something told him, he wasn't going to get it from Marco. As the doctor prepared to ask the next question, he watched Marco carefully, his mind racing with the implications of what he was seeing. What was he hiding? Before we continue with Lucia's story, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you who've subscribed and stuck with us till now. Your support truly means the world to us. Every like, comment, and share helps us spread awareness of these important stories, and we couldn't do it without you. For those who haven't subscribed yet, we're curious. What's holding you back? We want to hear from you in the comments. Let us know why you haven't subscribed yet. Is there something we can do better or a reason you haven't hit that button? Your feedback helps us improve and ensures we're delivering the content you want to see. The crime came to light slowly, pieced together by Dr. Eric Dahlström's quiet persistence and Lucia's moment of vulnerability. It all began in his examination room, a place where so many families had come and gone without a second thought. But for Lucia, it was a place where the weight of her secret grew unbearable. When Lucia had come in for a routine checkup with her father, Marco, everything seemed ordinary at first. Yet, as the doctor examined Lucia, it became increasingly clear that something was terribly wrong. Her symptoms, abdominal pain, fatigue, and most concerning of all, signs of pregnancy, were indicative of something far deeper than a simple medical issue. During the ultrasound, Dr. Dahlström's suspicions were confirmed. Lucia, at just 14 years old, was 28 weeks pregnant, and the fetus showed signs of intrauterine growth restriction (IUGR), a medical emergency that required immediate attention. But it wasn't the medical details alone that set off alarms. It was the chilling moment when Lucia opened up, her cryptic words sending shockwaves through the doctor. "She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him." Those words shattered the illusion that everything was fine. Lucia's brief statement in that vulnerable moment cracked open a horrifying truth. She was not just the victim of an unplanned pregnancy but of something far more sinister. She wasn't just afraid of the pregnancy, she was afraid of the person responsible for it, her father. Dr. Dahlström immediately took action. He insisted on hospital care for Lucia, explaining the critical nature of her condition and the urgent need for monitoring. Her physical health was at risk, but so was the baby's life. He pushed for immediate intervention, urging Marco to take his daughter to the hospital without delay. Marco, however, refused. His response was strange, almost dismissive. He insisted that they go to the hospital the next day, downplaying the seriousness of the situation. This only deepened Dr. Dahlström's suspicions. Why wasn't Marco reacting to the gravity of the situation? What was he hiding? Marco's behavior during the investigation was just as controlled and calculated as it had been during the medical examination. His refusal to act immediately on the doctor's recommendations, his insistence on delaying Lucia's hospital visit, and his defensiveness when questioned about the pregnancy all hinted at someone trying to avoid scrutiny. When the police began investigating, they quickly discovered the true horror behind Lucia's pregnancy. It wasn't a case of a boyfriend and a consensual relationship. Marco's role as the father was both unthinkable and undeniable. As law enforcement delved deeper into the case, they uncovered shocking evidence. Hidden photos, signs of long-term abuse, and disturbing details that painted a clear picture of a predator who had groomed his daughter for years. Marco, despite the overwhelming evidence, denied any wrongdoing. His version of events remained remarkably consistent. Lucia was just a troubled teenager, and the pregnancy was simply a misunderstanding. He continued to claim that Lucia had a boyfriend, but his story was unconvincing and fell apart quickly under scrutiny. Marco's refusal to confess was telling. He was emotionally detached, showing no real remorse or guilt. Instead, he attempted to control the narrative at every turn. During interviews, he was calm but rigid, unwilling to show vulnerability or admit to any fault. The police noted that his psychological profile indicated traits consistent with narcissism. He was self-absorbed, controlling, and lacked empathy for his daughter's suffering. The emotional manipulation he had exerted over Lucia was evident in the way he controlled their interactions, refusing to let her speak for herself and dominating the conversation. Despite the psychological evaluation where Marco was assessed for signs of personality disorders, he remained consistent in his denial. He refused to acknowledge his responsibility for the abuse, maintaining that he was simply protecting his daughter from the consequences of her own actions. However, as the investigation progressed and more evidence came to light, Marco's calm facade began to crack. The police uncovered his secret room in the basement, a place where Lucia had been kept isolated, away from the outside world. The photos, the hidden cameras, all signs pointed back to Marco. Despite his efforts to downplay his involvement, his guilt was undeniable. The psychological interviews and evaluations painted a picture of a man who used his power as a parent to dominate, isolate, and abuse his daughter for years. His refusal to show any remorse was chilling. He didn't see himself as the perpetrator. He saw Lucia as the problem. Marco's psychological evaluations revealed a manipulative personality, with traits of control and emotional detachment. He exhibited no empathy for Lucia or for the severity of the situation. The interviews showed him to be someone who was keen on maintaining power, not just as a father but as an abuser. The professionals involved in the case noted the disconnect between Marco's actions and his perceived role as a father. He genuinely believed that his actions, no matter how extreme, were justified. Even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of abuse, he continued to deflect blame and deny the reality of his behavior. It wasn't until Lucia found the strength to speak out, supported by her mother, Daniela, that the full scale of Marco's crimes was revealed. The police now had not just physical evidence but Lucia's testimony. In an emotional moment, she described the years of manipulation and control, how Marco had isolated her from the world, and how he had used his authority as her father to manipulate her into silence. Marco's arrest and eventual confession were a mere formality in comparison to the years of trauma Lucia had endured. The case became a horrifying example of family abuse. A father who had manipulated the system, the law, and his own daughter for years to hide the truth of his actions. Dr. Dahlström's push for hospital care wasn't just about the baby's health. It was about saving Lucia from a life of torment. The danger to Lucia's body was evident in the ultrasound findings, but the emotional and psychological damage she had suffered over the years was far more insidious. Lucia's bravery in speaking out was the turning point. It was a moment of clarity for both Dr. Dahlstrom and the police. The medical urgency was clear. Lucia needed immediate care, but more importantly, she needed to be removed from the toxic environment that had been poisoning her life. The clock ticked steadily in the background as Dr. Eric Dahlstrom continued to process the events of the evening. He had done everything he could. He had urged Marco to take Lucia to the hospital, explained the gravity of the situation with the ultrasound results. Yet, Marco's evasiveness was becoming more and more apparent. The doctor's gut told him that something wasn't right. Marco's story didn't add up. He claimed that Lucia had gone to the hospital with her mother, but the words didn't sit well with Dr. Dahlstrom. "We just got back from the pharmacy," Marco had said earlier, his voice a little too calm, too rehearsed. But there was a crack in his story. Lucia's mother hadn't been mentioned until now. Dr. Dahlstrom had known for months that Lucia's parents were divorced, and Marco had always been the sole guardian. There was no mention of Lucia's mother in their conversation at the clinic. So why was Marco suddenly mentioning her? Why had he waited until the very last moment to bring her into the story? The more Dr. Dahlstrom replayed their interactions, the more the discrepancies began to pile up. Lucia had refused to speak when asked directly. Her father answered for her, shielding her from any real interaction. And now Marco was lying about a hospital visit that hadn't happened. Dr. Dahlstrom couldn't ignore the red flags. The inconsistencies in Marco's account, his refusal to act with urgency, it all pointed to something darker. Even after hours had passed, Dr. Dahlstrom couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The more he thought about the ultrasound, about Lucia's cryptic words, "She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him," the more his concern deepened. There was an unsettling sense that this wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a cry for help that had been ignored for far too long. The images from the ultrasound, the irregular heartbeat, the stunted growth, it was all too much for the doctor to overlook. He knew Lucia needed immediate care, but Marco's refusal to acknowledge the severity of the situation made it clear that something more sinister was at play. The thought kept gnawing at him. Why wasn't Marco taking this seriously? Why was he so calm, so dismissive? It wasn't just a father trying to protect his daughter. It was the behavior of someone desperate to avoid responsibility, someone determined to control the narrative. Dr. Dahlstrom's professional instincts were telling him that this wasn't just a medical case. It was a matter of life and death for Lucia, and the stakes were far higher than Marco was willing to admit. The doctor's internal struggle weighed heavily on him. He wasn't just a medical professional. He was a witness to something far more alarming than a simple pregnancy. He knew he couldn't let it go, but the more he dug, the more questions arose. What was Marco hiding? Dr. Dahlstrom glanced at the clock again. The clinic had closed for the night, but his mind was still spinning. Lucia hadn't gone to the hospital. He had seen them leave together, but now, hours later, there was no sign of Lucia's arrival at any local hospital. The unease in his gut had grown into a palpable sense of dread. He had to act. He had to get Lucia the help she needed before it was too late. But the longer he waited, the more he realized. Marco wasn't just denying medical care. He was denying the truth. And it was time for Dr. Dahlstrom to find out what that truth really was. Dr. Eric Dahlstrom had done his best to help Lucia, but the more he thought about the evening's events, the more his instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. His mind kept replaying Lucia's cryptic words. "She kicks when she hears his voice. I hate that she likes him." Her words weighed heavily on him, growing more and more disturbing the longer he let them sit. The unease he had felt earlier began to grow into an undeniable certainty. He needed to know the truth. He couldn't ignore it any longer. After hours of careful thought, Dr. Dahlstrom decided to take a dangerous step. He had already been in touch with Lucia's mother, Daniela, but he knew that time was of the essence. Marco had insisted they go to the hospital the next day, but every fiber of Dr. Dahlstrom's being told him that Lucia couldn't wait another moment. He had been to the Håkan house before, just a brief greeting in passing, a friendly neighborly exchange. But today he couldn't shake the feeling that something dark and hidden was behind those walls. He walked up to the Håkan residence, his heart pounding in his chest. The lights were on inside and there was no sign of anyone leaving. Marco had told him that Lucia had gone to the hospital with her mother, but the contradiction gnawed at him. He had to see for himself. As he approached the door, his thoughts raced. What if Lucia was inside? What if she was still trapped in that house? When the door opened, he was met with Marco's stern expression. But before Marco could close the door on him, Dr. Dahlstrom took a step forward. His mind was made up. He would not leave without answers. "I'm sorry, Marco," the doctor said, his voice steady, but the urgency behind his words unmistakable. "I need to see Lucia. I can't let this go." Marco tried to resist, but there was something in the doctor's eyes that made him hesitate. It was only for a moment, but that hesitation was enough. Dr. Dahlstrom entered the house, his gaze sweeping over the small, sparsely furnished living room. The tension in the air was thick. As Dr. Dahlstrom turned the corner toward the hallway, he noticed a door partially ajar. A door that seemed out of place in a home that appeared so neat and ordinary. It was an old wooden door, weathered with age, but it hadn't been opened in the time Dr. Dahlstrom had known the family. He pushed the door gently, feeling the weight of something unseen, something he couldn't yet understand, pressing down on him. Behind that door was a hidden room, and what he found inside was more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. The room was bare, save for a few old photos, a bed, and what looked like video equipment. The photographs on the walls were of Lucia, and they made his stomach churn. There were shots of her, taken in various stages of undress, her eyes vacant and distant. The photos weren't just random pictures. They were moments, pieces of a carefully crafted collection that painted a chilling portrait of a predator's power. The realization hit Dr. Dahlstrom like a punch in the gut. It wasn't a boyfriend who had fathered Lucia's baby. It was Marco, her father. The man who had brought her into his clinic just hours ago was not just a concerned parent. He was the predator. His hands shook as he backed out of the room, the photographs still burning in his mind. He had to act. This couldn't wait. Dr. Dahlstrom's mind was reeling. He had never felt more sure of anything in his life. He had seen the truth and he could not walk away from it. His thoughts were no longer scattered. Everything had fallen into place in a horrifying clarity. Marco was a monster and Lucia was in grave danger. Without a moment's hesitation, Dr. Dahlstrom pulled out his phone. He dialed 911, his voice steady but urgent as he spoke to the dispatcher. "I need to report child abuse and endangerment. There is a 14-year-old girl in immediate danger. She is pregnant and her father is the perpetrator. I have evidence of long-term abuse and I believe she is still in the house. Please send help right away." As the dispatcher confirmed his location and sent units to the scene, Dr. Dahlstrom's heart was racing, but his resolve was absolute. He couldn't let this go. He had witnessed Lucia's pain, her silent desperation, and now he had proof of the nightmare she had been trapped in for years. Dr. Dahlstrom turned to Marco, his voice firm but compassionate. "Marco, I know what you've been hiding. This ends tonight. You need to leave the house. The police are on their way. Marco's face contorted in fury, but he didn't move. He stood there, silent and defiant, his eyes dark with anger. There was no remorse. No acknowledgement of the horror he had inflicted on his daughter. But Dr. Dahlstrom wasn't afraid. He had done the right thing, and now the authorities were on their way. As the minutes dragged on, the sirens grew louder, cutting through the quiet night air. And in that moment, as the sound of approaching police cars filled the street, Dr. Dahlstrom knew that Lucia was no longer alone. The truth had been uncovered, and justice was finally on its way. The air outside was thick with tension, as Dr. Dahlstrom stood on the porch, watching the police vehicles arrive. His heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he knew the moment of truth was upon him. Marco had been cornered. But there was no telling what he might do now. The house was eerily quiet, and for a brief moment, it seemed like the calm before the storm. But then the door burst open. Marco, with a wild look in his eyes, stepped out and slammed it shut behind him. Lucia wasn't with him. Dr. Dahlstrom's breath hitched in his throat. He had no idea where she was. Marco had been so calm before, but now, his desperation was palpable. This wasn't just about hiding his crime anymore, it was about escape. Marco's eyes locked with Dr. Dahlstrom's, and for a split second, it was as if time stood still. Then, without warning, Marco turned and ran, his footsteps echoing in the night. Dr. Dahlstrom's heart skipped a beat as he realized Marco wasn't just running. He was running with Lucia. Panic surged through him. No, not again. Not after everything Lucia had been through. Marco moved swiftly, with a disturbing purpose, heading for the roof. Dr. Dahlstrom hesitated for only a moment before following, his pulse racing as the reality of the situation sank in. Would they survive this ordeal? Marco reached the roof's edge, his grip tightening on Lucia's arm as she struggled beneath him. She was afraid. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She had been through so much already, and now Marco had her backed into a corner. "Stay back," Marco shouted, his voice rising with fear and anger. "I'll take her down with me if you come any closer." The tension reached its peak. Lucia's cries pierced the night air, but Marco's grip only tightened. He was ready to take his final stand, desperate to avoid the consequences of his actions. He wasn't just running from the law, he was running from his own guilt. The standoff felt endless. The flashing lights of the police cars below seemed to blur in Dr. Dahlstrom's vision as he stood frozen, watching Lucia's life hang in the balance. Would she make it out? Would they make it out? But just as it seemed like Marco was going to jump, something shifted in the air. The police had made their move. The first officer approached the roof, positioning himself in the shadows, out of Marco's line of sight. Dr. Dahlstrom stepped back, unable to do anything but watch, his mind racing with fear for Lucia. "Marco," a voice shouted from below, "Detective Morales. This is the police. Let her go. It's over." Marco didn't respond, his grip on Lucia's arm tightening. He was going to jump. There was no way around it. But just as Marco tried to pull Lucia further back, the officers on the roof closed in. In a blur of motion, they tackled him to the ground, their hands grabbing at him with practiced precision. "No!" Marco screamed as he fought, but the officers quickly subdued him, pinning him to the roof before he could harm anyone. Lucia, trembling, was pulled safely away from the edge. In the nick of time, the police had arrived, and with swift intervention, they saved her life. Lucia was trembling, but she was free. She was alive. The nightmare was finally over. As Marco was handcuffed and pulled to his feet, his face twisted in rage and disbelief. He had been caught. And the truth was now out, there would be no more hiding. Dr. Dahlstrom stood there watching the scene unfold. Lucia was safe now. He had done what he could, but it was the officers who had brought her the help she so desperately needed. The flashing lights, the police shouting orders, it was all fading into the background, but Dr. Dahlström's heart was still racing. The weight of what he had just witnessed hung heavily on him. Lucia's tears were no longer from fear, they were from relief. As the officers led Marco away, his eyes burning with resentment, Dr. Dahlström finally allowed himself to exhale. The nightmare had ended. But the long road to recovery for Lucia had just begun. The road ahead for Lucia Håkan was long, but it was no longer a journey she had to face alone. The physical scars of what she had endured, the pregnancy, the abuse, the years of isolation, would take time to heal, but it was the emotional toll that would be the most difficult to overcome. She had lived in a prison of silence and fear, but now, finally free from Marco's grip, she began the slow, painful process of reclaiming her life. At the hospital, surrounded by a team of caring professionals, Lucia was given the medical attention she needed, but the real healing began in the arms of her mother, Daniela Rivera. When Lucia's eyes met her mother's, there was a moment of quiet recognition, a bond that had never truly been broken, despite the years of estrangement. "It's going to be okay," Daniela whispered, her voice cracking with emotion as she stroked her daughter's hair. Lucia nodded weakly, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, hope. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that the future might not be as dark as the past. In the weeks that followed, Lucia began therapy, supported by her mother every step of the way. The road to recovery would not be easy, and there were moments when Lucia felt overwhelmed by the memories of what had been taken from her. But with each passing day she grew stronger, her resilience shining through even in the most painful moments. The trauma of her experience would stay with her for the rest of her life, but Lucia was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and her strength was beginning to rebuild the foundation of the future she deserved. For Daniela Rivera, the last few months had been a whirlwind of emotions, grief, anger, disbelief, but most of all, relief. She had spent years separated from her daughter, unsure of what was happening behind closed doors, fighting to get back into Lucia's life, only to find her daughter had been suffering in unimaginable ways. The estrangement had been her fault, but the betrayal of Marco, the man she had once trusted, was something she never could have prepared for. As Daniela reflected on the years of lost time, the moments she could never get back, the years spent in silence while her daughter's cries for help went unheard, her heart broke anew. But in the wake of Marco's arrest, she vowed never to let anything separate her from Lucia again. She would protect her daughter at all costs, no matter the personal cost to herself. Daniela's devotion to her daughter grew stronger each day. She attended every therapy session, helped Lucia navigate the painful memories, and made sure she felt unconditionally loved. As a mother, Daniela had spent years thinking about what she could have done differently, but now her focus was on making the present, and the future, safe for Lucia. "I will never let her go again," Daniela whispered to herself, her eyes filled with determination. She had been given a second chance to be there for Lucia, and she wasn't about to waste it. Their bond, despite everything that had happened, was unbreakable. As for Marco Håkan, the man who had once been seen as a proud father, his life had been shattered in an instant. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of child abuse, including sexual assault, incest, and child endangerment. In the aftermath of the trial, Marco was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His attempt to control his daughter's life had ultimately cost him everything: his freedom, his reputation, and his ability to ever harm Lucia again. In prison, Marco showed no remorse. He denied the charges, continuing to maintain that he had done nothing wrong, that his actions had been justified. Psychological evaluations in prison revealed a man whose distorted sense of entitlement and control ran deep. He never expressed any true regret for his actions, showing a chilling lack of empathy for what he had done to his daughter. The trial and sentencing marked the end of Marco's reign of terror. There was no chance for rehabilitation, no hope for redemption. The justice system had delivered its verdict, and Marco would spend the rest of his life behind bars, paying for the damage he had done. Despite the horrific nature of the crime, Lucia's story was one of survival. A girl who had endured unimaginable pain but refused to let it define her. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and setbacks, but she had a support system now, a mother who would fight for her until her last breath, a community that would stand by her, and a strength within her that no one could take away. Lucia had a future, one that was no longer controlled by fear. With each day she was learning to reclaim her voice, to reclaim the parts of herself that had been lost for so long. And with Daniela by her side, she knew she would never have to face the darkness alone again. For Daniela, the journey of motherhood had taken an unexpected and painful turn, but in the end, it was a journey of redemption. Her love for Lucia had never faltered, even when she couldn't be there physically. And now, as they built a new life together, she made a promise that would last a lifetime. She would always be there, no matter what. Lucia's story is one that no one should ever have to live through. But her bravery in the face of unimaginable horror reminds us all that even in the darkest times, there is hope. Lucia found the strength to break her silence and reach out for help, a courage that ultimately led to her rescue. While her journey toward healing has only just begun, her survival is a testament to the power of speaking out, the importance of trusting others, and the resilience of the human spirit. This case isn't just about one girl's suffering, it's a reminder to all of us. We must never turn a blind eye to those in need. The most dangerous thing we can do is remain silent when we see someone hurting. Lucia's story should inspire us to always listen, to never stop questioning, and to always stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. If Lucia's story has touched you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed someone in need but didn't know how to help? Let us know how we can all do better and raise awareness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories and to continue supporting victims who need our voices. Your engagement, whether it's liking, commenting, or sharing, makes a difference in spreading these important stories. Thank you for being part of this community. Together, we can make sure that stories like Lucia's are never forgotten.